Wyoming Territory, June 1879, they called her mad before they ever knew her name. Olive Zeller stood barefoot in the frostbitten grass outside her cabin, talking soft and low to someone who was not there. Folks in town whispered about her, said she had gone strange after the fire, said she was cursed, touched in the mind. Said she talked to ghosts. Nathaniel Osbourne had heard all that on the ride in to Larkspur Ridge. He had been in town less than 4 hours, still dust covered from the cattle trail, when he saw her through the mercantile window, bare arms tangled in wild curls, lips moving to air. She was talking to herself again. "Maybe she just needs a friend," Nathaniel said, loud enough for the storekeeper and his busybody wife to hear. They stared at him like he had grown horns. He stepped outside, tipped his hat low against the glare, and followed the direction she had gone up past the edge of town, through the pines, to the little log cabin clinging to the hillside like a secret. She saw him coming from a dozen yards off and stopped in the middle of her path, a basket of wild mint and chickweed balanced on her hip. "I ain't a charity," she said, pale eyes fixed on him. "Good," Nathaniel said, slowing his horse. "I ain't a preacher." She looked at him another long second, then turned and kept walking. He followed anyway. The cabin was small and crooked, half shaded by aspens. It had clearly been rebuilt, rough logs and scorched beams, patched with mismatched wood. He dismounted and tied his horse to a stump. "You always talk to yourself?" he asked, quiet like she didn't flinch. "Nobody else listens." "You sure?" he asked. She turned and looked him full in the face. "You think I'm mad too?" "No," Nathaniel said. "I think most people are too afraid to be alone with their own thoughts. Maybe you are just brave." That stopped her. Her mouth softened just a little. "You got a name, Nathaniel Osbourne," she nodded. "Olive Zeller." They stood there in the sun-washed silence. Her dress was faded blue calico, worn through at the elbows. Her hands were calloused, stained green from herbs. She looked like someone who had been surviving for a long time. "What happened to your cabin?" he asked. "Fire," she said. 2 winters back. She did not explain how it started. He did not ask. He helped her carry the basket inside. The inside smelled like dried sage and smoke. There were tin cups and wooden shelves, a rocking chair, and an empty cradle tucked in the corner. Olive caught him looking. "My daughter was still inside when it burned," he swallowed. "I'm sorry." "So is every damn person in town," she said, not unkindly. He looked at her, really looked. Her face was raw in the light, no makeup, no pretense, just pain and the stubborn strength of someone who had not let it break her. "I meant it," he said. She turned her back to him and started hanging herbs from a low beam. "Why are you really here, Nathaniel?" "I was passing through, looking for work, then I saw you." She turned back, arms folded. And something told me you were worth knowing." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You do not know me." "Not yet." That night he made camp just outside her cabin. She brought him a tin plate with stew and sat across from him near the fire. "You really do not think I am mad?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I think you are lonely." She looked down at her hands. "I talked to her, you know, my daughter. I know she is gone, but sometimes it helps." He nodded. "You can talk to me too if you want." For a long while neither of them said anything. The fire cracked, the crickets sang, and Olive's shoulders slowly relaxed. "You have any family?" she asked. "No," he said. "Ranch burned when I was 17. My folks never made it out. I've been riding ever since." She met his eyes. "Guess we both lost something to fire." He nodded once. The next morning he chopped wood for her without asking. She watched from the porch, arms crossed, face unreadable. By dusk he had fixed the back fence and patched a hole in her roof. "You planning on staying here?" she asked. "For a while," he said. "And what is in it for you?" He stood there in the golden light, hands on his hips. "Peace, maybe a friend." She stared at him, then nodded once. "Fine. You can stay, but I do not talk much in the mornings," he grinned. "I do not mind the quiet." Over the next week, Nathaniel kept to his word. He did not push. He helped where he could, fixed her old plow, hunted rabbits, and listened when Olive spoke to the wind. He started to learn the rhythm of her life, the way she checked the garden each morning, how she hummed when she worked. Slowly, she stopped flinching when he got too close. One evening, he found her sitting by the creek behind the cabin, her bare feet in the water. "You ever think you will leave this place?" he asked, sitting beside her. No, she said. It is the last place she saw. He nodded, picking up a flat stone and skimming it across the water. I ain't trying to fix you, Olive, he said. Just hoping maybe you will let me stay long enough to know you. She looked at him then, really looked. You already know more than most, he smiled. Then I am off to a good start. That night she let him sit beside her on the porch. She leaned her shoulder just barely against his. And for the first time in 2 years, Olive Zeller did not talk to the empty air, she talked to him. The wind carried the scent of pine and river silt as the days stretched longer. By the second week, Nathaniel had traded calluses for a rhythm rising before sunup, clearing the rocky path that led to Olive's garden and mending what needed mending without being asked. The land didn't offer thanks, but it made space for him. He found her one morning near the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley. She was kneeling, pressing something into the soil, narrow-leafed plants with tiny white blossoms. "Yarrow," she said before he asked. "Stops bleeding. Good for headaches too if you dry it right." Nathaniel crouched beside her, brushing the dirt from his palm. "You learn all that from books, from my grandmother," she said. "She was a half-day's ride from here. Taught me what plants do before she passed." He looked out over the slope, the way the hills curved into each other like folded cloth. "You ever think about showing others? Folks here don't ask. They'd rather pretend I'm touched than let me treat their fevers." He rested his elbows on his knees. "That why you stay out here?" "I stay because I know what I'm doing, and because I don't want anyone pretending they're doing me a kindness when they're really keeping their distance." Nathaniel squinted toward the horizon. "I think some folks just don't know how to sit still long enough to understand someone." She glanced at him then, her expression unreadable. "And you do?" "I'm trying." Later that week, he built her a drying rack for the herbs, using stripped willow branches and twine. He set it in a patch of sunlight near the window without saying anything. She noticed, but didn't comment, just began laying out leaves in careful rows. That evening, Olive brought out a pair of tin mugs with warm, sweet-root tea and sat beside him where he was oiling his saddle. "You ever think about settling?" she asked. He ran the cloth along the worn leather. "Sometimes, but I never found a place that made the quiet feel like something I wanted to keep." She sipped from her mug, her fingers wrapped around the dented tin. "And now," he shrugged, "I ain't running." "That's something." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You strike me as someone who's always had to be useful to be welcome." He didn't answer at first, then, "That's the way of it, usually." She nodded slowly. "You don't have to earn your place here every day." He met her eyes. "Maybe I want to." One night, after the moon had risen high and the coyotes were howling far off in the hills, she brought out a wooden box he hadn't seen before. Carved with faded flowers, it held small bundles of cloth, a silver thimble, and a child's worn bonnet. She set it on the porch between them. "I haven't opened it in over a year," she said. "Wasn't sure if I ever would again." He didn't speak, just waited. She unfolded a scrap of embroidery, clumsy stitches in the shape of a horse's head. "She tried to make this for me. Said it was you after you rode past once last fall." Nathaniel glanced toward the woods. "I didn't know." She watched everything. "Thought I didn't notice. She saw you ride in that day, said you looked like someone who wouldn't leave." He cleared his throat. "She was wrong. I did leave. You came back," Olive said, folding the cloth again. They sat with the open box between them, neither reaching to close it. The fire inside the house had long since gone out, but neither moved to relight it. "Do you believe in signs?" she asked finally. "I believe in noticing what most folks miss." "Then maybe you'll notice this," she said, voice soft but sure. "I don't talk to her when you're near, not because I've forgotten, but because I don't need to fill the silence." Nathaniel turned toward her, his face lit faintly by starlight. "Then I'll stay as long as you'll have me." She didn't answer with words, just reached across the space between them and set her hand over his, warm and sure. The bonnet stayed in the box. The box stayed open. And for the first time in a long while, the night didn't feel like something to get through. It felt like something beginning. The first rain of the season came down slow and steady, softening the edges of everything. Nathaniel stood near the front stoop with a handful of kindling, water dripping off his hat brim. Olive had left the door propped open, her sleeves rolled as she worked a needle through coarse linen by the hearth. "Your boots are soaked through," she said without looking up. "They dry better by the fire than under the eaves." She tied off a stitch and set the linen aside. "You'll catch cold if you don't pull off those socks. I've had worse." "Worse doesn't mean good." He stepped inside, shook off the wet, and knelt to tug at the worn socks while Olive fetched a folded wool blanket from a cedar chest. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "For the chill." Nathaniel took it without argument and wrapped it around his shoulders. The firelight painted the lines of his face deeper, made the scar beneath his jaw more visible. "Where'd you get that?" she asked. He glanced at her, then touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. "Back in '73. Texas Panhandle, Cattle Drive ran wrong. We crossed into territory some folks didn't want us in." "You get that close to dying, it changed you," he nodded. "Some things don't unmark you." Olive sat again, this time across from him, her hands idle. "I never asked where you learned to fix things the way you do." "My uncle was a smith. After the fire, I stayed with him for a while. He never talked much. Just handed me tools and expected I'd figure it out." "You did." "I broke a good many things first." She smiled, faint and small, the kind that didn't press too much into the face. "You speak quieter than most men I've met." He folded his hands in his lap. "Noise never did much for me." They listened to the rain tick against the roof, the logs crackle and shift in the hearth. Olive reached for the kettle, poured hot water into the small clay pot she kept for infusions, and let a handful of dried petals steep. "Chamomile," she said. "Helps with rest." Nathaniel watched her hands move, precise and calm. "You sleep easy most nights." "Not since I was 16, she said, setting the pot between them. "But the tea softens the edges." He poured a cup and held it close, the steam rising slow. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" "I used to," Olive said, "before everything burned, but now I think if I left, I'd lose what little still remembers me." "You think land remembers people?" She looked toward the window. "I think the ground keeps stories. And I think it waits for someone to listen." Nathaniel drank, let the heat fill the hollow places. "Then maybe that's why I'm here, to listen," she asked. He nodded. "And to stay." The rain eased near midnight. Neither of them had moved from the hearth. The fire had gone low, but neither reached for more wood. Olive's head rested lightly against the side of her chair, her eyes half-lidded but wakeful. "You believe people can start over?" she asked. "I believe they can decide not to be ruled by what came before." She studied him in the dim light. "I don't know if I can love again." "I'm not asking you to," Nathaniel said. "I'm asking if you'll let me be beside you while you find out." Her eyes didn't soften, they steadied. "You'd wait that long?" "I already have." She leaned forward, took his hand, and placed it palm up in hers. "Not grasping, just resting together." "I talk to her less," she said, "but I feel her more." "You don't have to explain." "I know, but I want to." Outside, the clouds had thinned, moonlight spilled across the wet grass. The world was quiet again, but not empty. Nathaniel didn't move his hand. Olive didn't pull away. The cradle in the corner stayed untouched. But the room felt different now, like something had shifted, not in the furniture, but in the air between them. And for the first time since the fire, Olive Zeller began to imagine a life that could stretch beyond what had been taken. By late July, the wild raspberries had ripened near the creek bend. Olive took to walking the slope before the sun crested the ridge, skirt gathered in one hand, a woven basket in the other. Nathaniel joined her without asking, keeping a steady pace a few steps behind, the way one might follow a trail they meant to trust, not tame. "You always walk this early?" he asked, brushing dew from his boots with his stride. "Before the birds get to them," she said, crouching beside a thicket. "They pick the best ones clean if you wait too long." He knelt beside her, careful not to crush the low branches. "I used to think berries just grew wild for anyone to take, didn't know how much watching went into gathering. You watch long enough, you learn what comes back year after year, and what doesn't." Nathaniel picked a few, dropping them into the basket. "My mother planted gooseberries behind our house once. Didn't last, too much shade." Olive wiped her fingers on her apron. "Some things don't take root no matter how much you want them to." He glanced at her, but she didn't look up. The morning sun hit the curve of her jaw and he could see the faint trace of freckles beneath the skin. "What's the farthest you've ever been from here?" he asked. "Cheyenne," she said after a pause. "I rode out once when I was 18. Thought I'd find something bigger than this place. Did you?" "I found a man who smiled too wide and lied easy." She stood and stretched her back. "I came home the same week." Nathaniel stood with her. "You never wanted to try again." "I did," she said, voice level. Then the world got smaller. They walked back slowly, the basket half full, Olive brushing aside spiderwebs with a stick. By the time they stepped onto the porch, the sun had dried the morning damp. Nathaniel set the basket on the table and reached for the pitcher beside the basin. "You ever think about teaching someone what you know?" he asked, pouring water over his hands. Olive dried hers on a cloth. "Hard to teach when no one asks." "I'm asking." She paused, then met his eyes. "You want to learn herbs?" "I want to learn anything you think matters." She studied him for a breath. "All right, but you'll need your own satchel, and I don't like repeating myself." "I'm a fair listener," he said, pulling a chair away from the table. That afternoon, she showed him how to strip bark from willow, how to dry it slow so it didn't mold. She pressed his hand to the leaves of mullein and told him to remember the feel if he ever needed to soothe a lung. He didn't write anything down. He remembered. Days passed like that, one folded into the next. They worked side by side, not always talking, not always silent. Nathaniel never asked about the past. Olive never asked where he'd go if he left. Neither of them needed to. One evening, she was braiding bundles of lavender to hang over the door when he returned from checking the fence line. His shirt was damp with sweat, collar darkened, a small rip near the shoulder. "You tear that on the north fence?" she asked. "Barbed wire caught me." "Sit," she said, reaching for her sewing tin. "I'll patch it." He sat on the bench and pulled the shirt over his head. She stitched in silence, fingers quick and sure. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked suddenly. He looked down at his hands. "Not in a long time." "Why not?" "Didn't figure I'd stay anywhere long enough." She tied off the thread and sat back. "And now," he looked up at her then. "Now I think about it every day." Olive didn't look away. "You'd marry a woman who keeps to herself, who talks more to plants than people." "I'd marry a woman who knows what she's about, who listens more than she speaks and means every word she says." She set the needle aside. "I've got ghosts, Nathaniel. We all do." She reached for his hand, not tentative this time, but steady. "I'd want something quiet, no preacher, no crowd, just the land and the morning and a promise." He nodded, fingers curling around hers. "That's all I'd want too." The last light fell across the floorboards, long and gold. The room held no noise but the sound of wind through the open window and the rustle of herbs swaying above the door, and in that stillness something settled. Not a beginning, not an ending, but a turning like a wagon shifting from trail to home. Neither of them let go. The first frost came early. It crept in overnight, silvering the garden edges and turning the fields brittle beneath the morning sun. Nathaniel rose before Olive that day, bundled in his coat, breath fogging the air as he hauled the last of the firewood to the shed. When she stepped out, shawl pulled tight, he was already splitting kindling with the small axe she kept sharpened near the porch. "You work like winter's already through the door," she said, pulling her braid over one shoulder. "It's close enough I can hear it breathing." They had begun stacking jars in the root cellar, lining shelves with stewed apples and pickled carrots, dried beans in cotton sacks. Olive labeled each in her tidy hand, and Nathaniel built another shelf when she ran out of space one morning. She found him carving something beneath the cottonwood near the creek, his back to her, knife working slow. She crossed the field without calling out. "What is it you're making?" she asked once she was close enough to see the shavings at his feet. He turned it toward her. It was a shallow bowl, smooth-edged, the inside carved with a ring of tiny pressed flowers, their shapes etched careful but not perfect. "Something for your herbs," he said. "Or whatever you want it for." She ran her finger along the rim. "You did this for me. You've given me a place to belong. Seems fair I give something back." She held it to her chest, face unreadable. "This is the first thing anyone's made for me since I was a girl." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything, Later that week, Olive brought out a cotton bundle wrapped with twine. She handed it to him on the porch without ceremony. "I made you something," she said. "It's not much." He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a shirt, deep brown with a reinforced yoke and hand-stitched cuffs. The seams were straight, the fabric heavy and warm. "I figured you'd need something decent come winter," she added. He looked at her. "You stitched this whole thing?" "I know how to make a thing hold," she said, "even after it tears." Nathaniel reached for her hand, not rushed. She let him fold her fingers into his. "You've been a place I didn't think I'd find," he said. She nodded once, her throat working. "So have you." They married beneath the cottonwood, just them and the land and the sound of wind through the still leaves. Olive wore a dress she'd dyed herself from walnut hulls, and Nathaniel wore the shirt she'd sewn. He'd carved them 2 rings from juniper, sanded smooth and tied with leather cord. No preacher, no paper, just a promise spoken clear with hands joined and eyes steady. "I'll be yours through every season," he said. "And I'll be yours," she answered, voice strong, "through every sorrow and every quiet." Afterward, they sat on the porch where most of their days had unfolded. Olive brewed tea strong with pine needles and honey, and Nathaniel brought out the good blanket they kept folded in the cedar trunk. As the sun dipped low, she rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you miss the road?" she asked. He shook his head. "I've had enough of leaving." They built the rest of the winter together. The barn held 2 goats and a coop of hens that Olive bartered for with dried calendula and salves. Nathaniel repaired the cabin's chimney with river stones, and when the snow came heavy, they read aloud from the tattered book she kept by the hearth, trading chapters as the fire burned low. In early March, she pressed his hand to the soft curve of her belly. "You're sure?" he asked, eyes wide. She nodded. "I've counted the days 3 times. He bent his head, kissed the place her hand rested. "We'll raise them with every gentleness we never had." "I know," she said, smiling for the first time in a way that reached all the way to her eyes. He built a cradle from pine, not like the old one. This one had a curved base, and he lined it with wool she spun herself. They painted the walls with crushed berries and clay, pale ochre and soft plum. When the snows melted, he planted potatoes beside her carrots, and she taught him how to tell a sick chicken from a broody one. He caught her humming, sometimes, when she didn't think he was listening. That summer, a child was born in the same room where once there had only been loss. Olive held her daughter to her chest, hair damp and loose, Nathaniel's hand wrapped around hers. She named the girl Miriam after her grandmother, and Nathaniel wept without shame when the baby's fingers curled around his thumb. They never left the ridge. There was no need. Years passed. The cabin weathered and settled deeper into the earth. Another child came, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's quiet knowing. Olive taught them both the names of plants, how to read the wind, how to listen when someone spoke less with words and more with presence. Nathaniel taught them how to mend leather and split logs true. They grew older with grace, not ease, but grace. The land demanded much, but it gave back in its own way. The garden remained full, the hearth never cold, and the silence between them stayed warm, not empty. And every night, just before sleep, he reached for her hand beneath the quilt. She never pulled away, not once. They had lost much, but they found each other. And in that, everything else was made whole.